nomads. Just
I met some people like that.
I would like to call to order the September 2023 meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us via the live stream video and those attending in the boardroom or via Zoom. I think Vice Chair Gully may or may not be joining us on Zoom today. I'd also like to welcome our student representatives who are sitting with the Audit and Compliance Committee today. That would be Hal Johnson from the Morris campus and Leal Cohen from the Rochester campus. And by way of quick welcome remarks, this is my first meeting as chair and first time on this committee, actually. So it's going to be a great journey, and I have Chair Emeritus Kenyanya here, as well as Regents Davenport and Talia Rabe, who will hopefully be nice to me as well.
I would hold my breath.
Yeah, right. And welcome Regent Johnson and I over from litigation. So we're in this together. But with that, we will move on to agenda item number 1, which is the 2023-2024 committee work plan. Regent Gully and I met with Chief Auditor Galswick over the summer to discuss the priorities of the committee in order to develop the work plan you have before you. The plan includes regular business as usual items, as well as space for emerging hot topics and updates for ongoing initiatives. So Chief Auditor Galswick, would you like to make any comments about the work plan?
Perfect. Thank you, Chair Farnsworth. So if you turn to page 6 of your document materials, this is where the work plan begins. I'll skip over the September meeting as we're currently going through that and move straight to the October meeting. A couple of things I want to highlight in our October meeting. There'll be the overview of the review of annual financial statements. This is to prepare the committee for their responsibilities associated with the review of the financial statements that are being put together by Deloitte. The second piece is really kind of a joint item here with the safety training process updates. This ties to the internal audit update. This is coming out of finding that we've had outstanding for a couple of years related to, or coming out of our university health and safety audit. And Associate Vice President Bonison and her team has been working on developing a safety program for the institution. So she will be coming in and presenting on that again in October. In December, the main item I want to highlight here is the recommendation for engagement of external auditor. So this is going to be a major item on the agenda for the year for the Audit and Compliance Committee. The external auditor is up for, their contract is up for review. Deloitte is our current external auditor, and after the completion of this contract, which was a 4-year contract with 3 one-year extensions, there is an opportunity to look at, to review that and make a new selection if so desired. So we'll be discussing with the chair and vice chair of the committee, the chair and vice chair of the committee will be meeting with a finalist prior to the December meeting, but I do want to highlight that this will be a review and action in a single meeting. And that was established as part of the RFP process at the Audit and Compliance Committee meeting last December. It's important just for the timing of how that will roll out. There'll also be in December the Institutional Compliance and Conflict of Interest Report, which is provided by Chief Compliance Officer Boyd Coomer. In February, this is really an external audit focused agenda. There will be a little bit of extra time within that committee if there's any additional items of hot topics, et cetera, that the committee would like to discuss in February. There's a little bit of extra space there. In May, this is really is designed to be a look at enterprise risk and just risk management in general for the Audit and Compliance Committee. It's a pretty big agenda as of now, but it will have a presentation of the Identity and Access Management Collaborative Assessment. This will be similar to what was done last year in May, where Bernie Glotchek, Vice President and CIO, came in and discussed with the committee the remediation efforts associated with that collaborative assessment. So this will be an additional update where they'll make some attestations on where the risk levels currently are at. There will also be a discussion of the approach to data privacy. That'll be another item that Boyd Coomer will be coming in to discuss with the committee. And then another enterprise risk management update. So for enterprise risk management, I think it's important for the committee to note that though this is housed within the administration, I think appropriately so, it's not an item that internal audit manages. It is the Audit and Compliance Committee's responsibility as part of board policy to provide oversight to the ERM function. And given the that this program is new and being established, I expect over the next couple of years, there's going to be quite a few presentations related to ERM as they are formalizing and maturing that. So Associate Vice President Bonison will probably be a frequent flyer here at the Audit and Compliance Committee. And then in June will be our internal audit update in our annual audit plan. So those are the key highlights I have on the work plan, but I stand for any questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you, Chief Auditor Galsworth. Does any committee members have any questions or comments? All right, I'll just add that I would like to point out in particular the engagement of an external auditor. I think that's going to be significant for this committee coming up in the next year. But Vice Chair Gully and I felt that this was balanced, and after a lot of workshopping of this work plan over the summer, feels like we got to the right spot. So. With that, I think we'll move on to agenda item number 2, which will focus on updates to the institutional risk profile. Here to walk us through those updates are Associate Vice President Catherine Bonison and Matt Ryerson, Senior Manager with Baker Tilly. And as soon as they are ready, I will ask Associate Vice President Bonison to start us off.
Good morning.
Morning.
And I'd like to introduce on the line, we have Matt Ryerson from Baker Tilly, who's our senior manager and has been a great partner in this work. And I'm Catherine Bonison, Associate Vice President, Health, Safety, and Risk Management. Thank you for having me today. We're going to walk through the institutional risk profile. We'll get to the agenda. We'll talk about just ERM just as a baseline, as a refresher, briefly. We'll talk about governance and some ideas around how we build this ERM program out and how we continue to solicit engagement and involvement, intersections with Impact 2025, and then just some next steps just to make sure we're kind of going down the right path and we're in alignment with what board leadership and other folks feel like is the right direction. So with that, we're going to kick it off. Just making sure Matt's still on the line. All right, here we go. So just as a reminder, and I know we've got some new faces on the committee, which is great to see, but what is ERM? And we won't get into a long, drawn-out discussion. I know it's a little hard to see some of the details in here, but in general, enterprise risk management is this ongoing process, right? It's not a report that we're going to do. It's not going to sit on a shelf. It's the identification of risks. It's the development of risk mitigation plans to manage those risks, and it's the monitoring of how we do in that mitigation process. So it's a cycle. So if we look at this pie chart, we are in this top left corner today, and we're going to talk through that risk profile that's been developed and solicit your feedback. And then hopefully the next time I'm here, we'll be in the second quadrant of the pie where we talk about mitigation plans and provide some examples. So again, as a reminder, we kind of anchor ourselves every time into why we're here and why we're talking about enterprise risk management. It was part of Impact 2025. It was one of our goals. With the Senior Vice President, along with the chancellors, we're charged with the goal of creating this program. So far to date, we have completed a number of items, and I just list them briefly. We've created a home for enterprise risk management here at Health, Safety, and Risk Management. So we rebranded University Health and Safety. We were fortunate in our RFP to have Baker Tilly join us and provide a lot of the work that you're going to hear about today. We've hired a key staff and ERM manager. We administered a number of surveys and interviews to develop this institutional risk profile, which we'll cover today. And we're introducing the governance structure and then some next steps. And so that's where we are to date. So if we pause a minute on governance structure, just to start this conversation, because ERM as a program, it might live in our department, but it has to live out across the institution and across the system. And the only way to do that is to engage at all levels, the very seniors to all the way down to folks boots on the ground. So what we'd like to propose, and this is based off of best practices with our Big Ten counterparts and others, is that we have this board engagement and these discussions that we're having today to really set the tone, to receive your feedback and hopefully endorsement, and to right size and redirect when needed. And that these discussions that we have at the most senior level are really through a lens of risk management and to start sort of building that cultural awareness around the university. The second piece is at that senior leadership level, and so the cabinet or the senior leadership team, to really own these risks and to be risk owners, to be engaged in those discussions, to help set those priorities, and to empower their teams to proactively manage those risks going forward. And then the next level is that operational level. And that's where a lot of the work gets done in terms of actually developing or pulling together those mitigation plans and feeding that up all the way through this chain. So that's the proposed governance structure. And again, this is just based off best practices when we look at our peer constituents. So our program, we facilitate, we provide certainly analysis and suggestions, but this is really a collaborative effort. So this slide is a repeat from when we last spoke in May, but we thought before we talked about the risk profile to just remind you how we created it. So it was a product, and again, this is why Matt's on the phone if there are questions, of discussions with senior leaders. There were interviews conducted by Baker Tilly. We also sent out surveys. I think we had about a 70%, 71% response rate, and there was general risk categories that go along with it that you can see at the bottom, where the survey questions are sort of organized and then ranked. And then, Matt, is there anything you'd like to offer about that process of developing the profile?
Well, good morning. I would just mention that underneath those risk domains, we also had, I would say, more sub risks. So we had a very comprehensive risk taxonomy that we provided during the survey process, as well as the interviews. The surveys were really intended to, hopefully pare down risks to those that were more important for conversations in one-on-one interviews.
Thank you, Matt. So here it is, after all this discussion, which is the title of our presentation, so the risk profile. And I will say right away, I know that there's not a lot of detail under these boxes, and we do have all of that, but for the sake of time, because the chief auditor put us on a pretty tight time frame, we did not include 16 additional slides with all of the details. So as you can see, these are ranked. It certainly does not mean that these are the biggest issues the university faces. This is the way that people that were interviewed, the biggest risks, right? This is their perception. These don't actually represent problems or issues within the university. We just want to make that clear. So we went to 16, which is a very large number, to make sure that we included research. It just didn't rise to the top, and being a large research-intensive university, we just thought it was really important that it be included, and so that's why there are 16. We absolutely recognize that is way too large of a list to tackle, so we are looking to do a little prioritization. A couple other notes, just in all transparency, some of the feedback we've received is that folks felt like athletics wasn't prominent in this list, and we just recognize that, and that's something we'd like to talk about when we go to update this, whether that's in the 6 to 8 month timeline. And additionally, the clinical affiliation discussion wasn't prominent in this list, and so we do recognize that. There was also some question around things like campus safety being listed as number 1, and then public safety is 13. Campus safety in the definition really is talking about internal, on campus. Do we have systems in place to help students, staff, and faculty navigate safely? And I don't mean physically navigate, but if something happens to me, do I know how to report it? Do I know how to exit a building? Is there appropriate lighting? Is there appropriate mechanisms for me to manage whatever issue is troubling me? Whereas number 13, public safety, is really external factors. And so we're really talking about crime or transportation or things that are happening outside of our walls. So I know that some of that feedback has come back. So that's the list of 16, and we'll have time at the end to kind of talk through this. What is also interesting is this is 16 across 5 campuses. And so we had some discussion at the senior leadership level about how do we do this across 5 campuses, because the way that Morris, Crookston, Rochester, or Duluth might maybe rank these might be very different than the Twin Cities. And we want to make sure this is meaningful. We did not come up with a great answer to that question, because it seems a little daunting to have 5 risk profiles, but we do recognize that we need to make this meaningful at each campus. So with that, the next slide is really just trying to take this risk profile and apply it to Impact 2025 goals, so we can see how it should align with our strategic plan. And this is something I think is important for us to do annually, is to always talk about risk as it relates to our strategic plan. I mean, it should tie in. And so when we talk about student success, I mean, some of these are clearly, directly related. And you could mix and match these probably a number of ways, but this is, again, just to give you the sort of pictorial view of how you apply this profile to a plan that we're already very familiar with. So we've done this first profile, and it's sort of like, okay, now what? We've got it, and that's great. So now we're on the piece of the consultation and feedback, which has been very engaging. We're very appreciative of the feedback we've received so far. We recognize that this is not, again, a one and done. It's a living document, and these risks will continue to move and shift, and hopefully some will come off because they're so well mitigated or they're no longer things that rise to the top, but unfortunately new ones will come on. We do hope that this becomes something that's a roadmap that people will look at to sort of right size or redirect themselves when there's questions about, is this something that the university is really poised to do really well, or is this something where we really have maybe some gaps? We also recognize that the list of 16 is big, and so it does require discussion and paring down and prioritization. But some of the feedback we've really received from senior leaders is, okay, again, so now what? How do you operationalize this? And so we'll talk about that next. So the hope is to take this profile, prioritize it, and then start applying it in a way that gives you something actionable. And so you can have items like a scorecard where you can actually look at risks. And we can do this at a macro level, we can do this at a micro level, and actually come out with, if we take this activity, how risky is this on a scale? And this isn't an absolute, but it gives us something tangible to help direct decision-making. So those are one of the sort of the outcomes we hope to get to. We'd also like to be able to do this at an operational level so that schools and colleges can apply something like this within their own departments. Whether they're considering offering a new minor or they're considering, doing international travel, that they can use these tools at the local level. Additionally, this is a product from Baker Tilly. Something we'd like to bring back to the Board of Regents level is maybe to have this dashboard or portfolio where we can constantly check in and have these conversations, and that you have a nice, easy way to see sort of where we started, where we are, where we're going, and sort of what we're watching, what's of concern, and progress made. So these are some of the products to just help you think of how does this play out in round 2 or round 3. So again, why are we here? Why do we keep having ERM on your docket item? And it's sort of the value question. To me, it's becoming much of a no-brainer. I mean, all of the pieces are here. Many of our departments do this work anyway. We have the controller's office that does a ton around financial controls. We have a really robust insurance program that does a lot of this work. ERM is really like the quilt that just pulls this all together in a way that helps us see and navigate from a system-wide view. It's going to provide a toolkit for senior leaders to hopefully make quick, more informed decisions, and then a framework for us to assess risk and whether or not we're willing to accept it, or if it's something that we're just not willing and we don't have the appetite for. We also hope that through these discussions, here at the Board of Regents and other places, it just builds a culture that talks about risk awareness, that we're thinking about this in the back of our mind. So some next steps, we'll continue to consult. I plan to spend some time with a number of our faculty and Senate committee meetings this fall. We'd like to work with the senior leadership team to really ratchet down and prioritize these top 3 actionable risks. We'd like to assign these risk owners, which I know not everyone's excited about because it feels like another thing to do, but we really someone needs to own a risk. And then what we're working on today is establishing this governance structure and hoping to get buy-in from the Board of Regents, senior leadership, and others. And we hope to come back this, February, thinking about the work plan that Chief Auditor just presented, to actually walk through a mitigation plan. And so to pick one and to come back to you and say, okay, so here's what it looks like. And if we walk through and we do the work, this is what you can expect. And then some questions that were in the docket material, that we hope to receive some feedback on is, do you feel like this profile accurately reflects the major risks to our system? And again, we always think system, not just campus. Do you think that there are key risk areas that maybe should have been more evident than what you saw? Does the proposed governance structure feel like an effective framework? And then do you have other ideas or things that you would like to see as deliverables as part of this program? So with that, I think I can wrap it up and be open to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. While we're waiting for colleagues to get in line with some questions, I will just ask one reflection and one question, which is when you're talking about the one of the last slides about why implement an ERM and the value question, I think that's very clear to me as someone being new to this, and I'm sure also folks who have heard this before. I think this is extremely important for all the reasons that you talked about, and it's great that the Board of Regents is within that proposed governance structure, because I do think it's important for this board to weigh in and endorse the value proposition of it, if you will, for the rest of the institution. My one question is, when you're talking about the the sample risk portfolio dashboard and then the risk scorecard, just thinking about this from a higher level view, introducing a risk scorecard or kind of a dashboard, a system to assess this work. I think about that in the context then of, we have an Impact 2025 metrics. We have the president's priorities, the board's priorities, even just from my standpoint, and I would presume then maybe from just, a member of the university community as well. I'm trying to keep kind of all these different ways that we assess things in order. And so maybe you could just comment a little bit more on how those would relate to the other ones, when we come back and talk about it, since we may be introducing another way of tracking things that's clearly related to some of these other things, very much so Impact 2025, as you talked about as an example.
Chair Farnsworth, members of the committee, it's a great question. It was also something we were thinking about and talking about these next steps in the reports, and how do we create something that always ties back into what already exists? Because if we create separate silos, we really aren't, to me, making a lot of progress. And so you're correct. I feel like having another scorecard that stands alone probably wouldn't be as meaningful as being able to tie it back to the strategic plan or to those other metrics that we already have in place. Now, saying that, how we cross that bridge, I think, is some of the discussions we can have. I hope to be able to have with the senior leadership team and others who have a little more ownership in the president's office of those scorecards to be able to make those connections. But I 100% agree. I think it would be the wrong move to have separate.
Great. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth and AVP Bonison. That was an excellent presentation. Your materials, I think, for me anyway, made it very understandable and reflects a tough picture of what we're trying to go at. I was fascinated by slide 7, and then I liked how you related it to slide 8. So 7 is the list of the, that one. And that this was perception. And so as we go forward, as you report back, I'd be interested in hearing how that plays out, because, and you can say true or false on this, some of these perceptions are disconnected with reality in the sense that people may not know all the controls that we have behind the scene. And so they're seeing one thing, thinking one thing, maybe take athletics, for example. It may, it's not high on the perception, and it may not need to be because it is so tightly controlled. So I'd be curious about your initial thinking about that, and as we move forward, maybe pointing some of that out.
Thank you, Chair Davenport. It's great feedback, because we were thinking the same thing with research, right? Because to me, it seems like there's so much risk in just the amount of research we do, but it could be, and that's some of the questions of why doesn't it rise higher? Why didn't people think the same way that I thought? So it would be interesting to actually, as we dig into these, to understand some of these risks. There's residual or inherent risk that's just so well mitigated that people either maybe aren't as aware, like you said, and it'll be interesting to see how we could tie that back and have those discussions to kind of close the gap of sort of what we perceive and then what's really kind of going on behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief Auditor Gulswick.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth. Regent Davenport, I agree with everything Associate Vice President Bonison just said, but what I'd add to that is at the stage in which we're at right now with this. I think this is more about inherent risk that is being perceived throughout the institution. Until her team has an opportunity to be able to start walking through those risk treatment plans, thinking about the controls that are in place, to be able to say, okay, where is our residual risk? Well, how much risk do we still have left over? I would expect that as this matures, and feel free to correct me, Associate Vice President Bonison, if you disagree, but as this matures, you're going to see this become more of a reflection of where the institution believes they have the highest level of residual risk. And that could be a situation where we have great controls in place, but just the inherent risk is so high that we can't really fully manage it, versus there might be something that happens, for example, that would make us think, oh, we really do need to work on this in order to be able to reduce that risk more. So I expect that this will change in the years to come.
Thank you.
Regent Davenport, any more follow-ups?
No, that's what I would suspect, I guess, going along.
Great. Regent
you.
Kenyanya.
Thank you, Chair. AVP Bonison, thanks for the presentation. Great conversation. I have a few thoughts and then some questions. I think to your point, there may be an opportunity to consolidate. You distinguished the two safeties, and they're different, but not different just in my opinion. I think that's certainly one opportunity. I see cybersecurity and privacy and security.
Right.
So definitely some opportunities there. You mentioned, athletics not being on here, or some other functions that people expected. When I look at this, I guess I expect to see functions, not units or specific areas. For example, these are the risks that athletics would have, right? Some more than others. Safety, they have the largest gatherings on campus, right? So that's the risk, not athletics itself. Reputation, that goes without saying, how that interplays employee retention, morale. So I feel like I wouldn't expect to see any specific units, just the specific things that go into that. I think clinical was mentioned as well. That one may be a little different, just in the nature of interacting with patients and whatnot. And I don't know how we'd reflect that, but I do admit that one might be a little different, and maybe should be reflected in here. So my questions are, one, about how does this evolve? And I think Chief Auditor kind of started answering that down the line, but and maybe we haven't figured out what that cadence is of revisiting this and this evolving. And then ownership, which I'm sure is a fun one, and fun conversations. What guides that conversation and considerations? I think if you look at some of these, it's a little more or less obvious: facilities and maintenance, or cybersecurity. I could take a stab at, and guess who's going to be the lucky one on that. But then leadership, reputation, political, I don't want to own those, and I'm not sure who does. So you could talk to that.
Associate Vice President Bonison.
Sure, thank you, Chair Farnsworth, Regent Kenyanya. It's a great question, and I will joke a little bit when I discussed this with the senior leadership team and we talked about ownership. I felt like it was, the game of pickup where no one wants to make eye contact with me, and everyone's like, but I agree. Some of these are really big buckets, and I had joked with Senior Vice President Franz that he's going to be the owner of quite a bit of risks, because some of these sort of big ones just might, like public safety and. But the discussion around, and I wrote down notes so I can hopefully get back to your questions, how do we assign risk owners, I hope is a consultative discussion with the senior leadership team and the cabinet, and then endorsement through the president's office to kind of finalize that. But we would like to have those senior leaders step up and say, I own enrollment strategy, which I think Provost Croson will know that probably that's where it's going to land. But there are a few, you're right, that will be a little less obvious, and we hope to have those conversations with the senior leadership team. How does this evolve? This is another piece of the conversation we had with the senior leadership team of, so how often do you check in on this list, right? How often do we maintain it just to make sure it's fresh and and maybe Matt has some thoughts, but right now we're thinking annually, and we could certainly flex as needed if something major happens and we say, wow, this just requires immediate attention. There's nothing that would preclude us from making those adjustments. But I think we do need a regular cadence. We need to have something that is like a program that is ongoing that says, hey, at this point every year, we need to have this discussion. We start it here with the Board of Regents and the Audit Committee, and then we take it with the senior leadership team and so forth, so that we don't have bad maintenance, right? And we continue to make sure this is a clean and healthy, productive discussion. Matt, is there anything you want to add to sort of the what next?
No, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to just proceed incrementally, try to leverage some early wins. I think we recognize that we need to have the right governance and structure in place, the right communication protocol, establish the right cadence. Annual tends to be sort of best practice when sort of launching ERM. But then, Catherine, as you mentioned, we'll continue to socialize, as this program continues to mature, as to whether there's a need, a desire, and a benefit of increasing the cadence at which we continue to sort of reassess, refresh the risk register so that we're focusing on the mission critical risks.
Great. Yeah, feel free to keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the answer. And I mean, and again, I'm going to make these more like comments because, they're probably not questions anyone really has an answer to. I guess the other part of ownership is, okay, we're eventually going to figure out some of those more nebulous ones. But then the next question is, what does it mean to own, again, not cybersecurity. What does it mean to own leadership or political risk and whatnot? And again, I understand that, that's something that we're going to figure out all together, but that's one thing I'm thinking about. And then my other comment, you brought up having this reflect the system, and obviously that's challenging because our campuses are different, but would just encourage we continue to keep that front of mind and see how we can have that all reflected here. But thank you for the answers and the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. Any other questions or comments? I'll just close with saying, I believe, looking back at the work plan, which we just talked about, I know you had mentioned February, but is it February or May, Chief Auditor Galswick, that this is coming back?
Chair Farnsworth, we're currently scheduled for May. It's possible that it could flex into the February timeframe if there isn't something else that goes into that slot, just as there's some additional capacity within that month. But the current plan is May.
Great. Yeah, I'll just say we have some flexibility. This is really important work depending on how it's moving. Certainly endorse if we have extra time in February and it seems pertinent to you and others that we would have an update, then certainly welcome that as well. So thank you very much for the presentation. With that, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is Chief Auditor Galswick providing us with an overview of the internal audit process. I believe he's going to move down to the presenters table. And so when Chief Auditor Galswick is ready, feel free to proceed.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair Farnsworth, members of the committee. So given the number of new faces on the Audit and Compliance Committee, we thought that it'd be good to take a step back and just talk through the audit process here at the University of Minnesota. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about just audit in general, all the various groups that conduct some audit work throughout the institution. And before I dig into what we do specifically within the internal audit department, from how we select audits, how we go about doing our auditing, how we report out on our audits. And at the end, there's a couple of items that are really unique to internal audit that are required by our standards that I want to highlight for the committee. So first, auditing at the university. Our external auditor, as we talked about earlier in the work plan, is currently Deloitte & Touche with the RFP underway. As part of their work, they're responsible for the institution's financial statement audit, the audit of federal programs, also referred to as uniform guidance, NCAA agreed upon procedures, and other audit work as requested by them. In addition, there's the Office of the Legislative Auditor that may come in and do periodic audits or reviews of specific areas or programs. as directed by the legislature. And there are federal auditors that are often on campus who are looking at the use of sponsored dollars or are looking at compliance related to specific regulations, et cetera. So think, NSF, for example, or OCR, for example, if there was something related to HIPAA, et cetera. And then there's us, internal audit. As you can see, we're the only internal one. So internal audit, who do we report to? So functionally, we report to the Audit and Compliance Committee. And by functionally, what I mean is this is where our audit reports are presented. This is where the discussion of our work is had. This is where we discuss our audit plan, what we're going to do over the next fiscal year, et cetera. From an administrative oversight perspective, I report directly to board leadership. So that would be for everything from my annual eval to expenses, et cetera. And that was a change that was actually made by Board of Regents policy back in October of 2021 as part of the transition between chief auditors, before the administrative oversight was provided by the president as allowed by Institute of Internal Audit Standards. Audit report distribution, we have a pretty broad distribution. The board, senior leaders, management of whatever process or unit that we're looking at, as well as Deloitte and the OLA receive a copy of all of our audit reports. The area that you're obviously most interested in is the board responsibilities related to that audit report. And so the key piece here is, again, it's that functional oversight. It's giving you, as especially audit committee members, an opportunity to look at our assessment, our independent assessment of how that unit is or process is managing the risks. And the areas where we believe that the residual risk is so high that there's a need for remediation. As part of all audit reports that we issue, I look to try to highlight for the committee and for the board key things to be thinking about, key trends, et cetera. I do that both as part of our internal audit updates that are 3 times a year in October, February, and June, but also in other communications. That being said, if you ever have questions about any of the audit reports, please feel free to reach out directly to me. And when needed, we can always bring somebody in from the administration as well to talk about any particular areas of concern or questions that you may have. The annual audit plan and results, as we talked about in the work plan, are always presented in June. So that's really the annual view of what we've been doing. So what we do, 3 major buckets is how we think about how we approach our audit work. The first is we conduct internal audit assurance work. That's really our bread and butter. These are planned audits per the audit plan or areas in which, based on continual risk assessments, that we say that we need to come in and do a formal audit where we would issue a report, et cetera. There's also special requests that can come from either the Audit and Compliance Committee or from the President. By board policy. And to be clear, any board member may request an audit to be conducted as part of annual audit planning. I meet with every board member to solicit feedback. But if there is an area of specific concern or request from any board member, we look to have that routed through the Audit and Compliance Committee to have that come to me just to make sure that we're gathering those. And again, as part of that to maintain that functional oversight of the Audit and Compliance, or that the Audit and Compliance Committee provides. We also perform investigations and allegations of operational or financial misconduct. It's our U report, our anonymous hotline. I personally receive a copy of all of those U reports, as do another member from my team, Office of Institutional Compliance, OGC, OHR, et cetera. So part of the group that will review all those. And then there are other times in which people may just reach out to us directly with potential concerns, and we may investigate. Finally, we provide advisory services and reviews on issues of risks and control. This is in alignment with our auditing standards to really try to provide the way I like to think about it is the best findings are the ones that we never have to write. So if we're in a situation where we're implementing a new process or a system, if we're able to talk about that on the front end, say here's some of the risks or some of the concerns we might have if we were to come in and do an audit, if we can get those controls implemented before we ever come, that's the ideal situation. So how we approach auditing, I've mentioned them a couple of times, I think, already, but all of our work is governed by the Institute of Internal Audit Standards. It's our outside governing body, and all of our auditors on our team are members. And as part of IAA standards, we really look at risk as internal auditors from a really broad lens. So the first, compliance with regulations and university policies. This is probably what you think of when you think of auditors, that they're coming in and confirming a specific regulation or policy is being complied with, which is true, and it's a major component of the risk that we look at. But we also have responsibilities related to a broader context of risk. So emerging risk, potential impacts of strategic initiatives, areas of governance, those types of things are also areas in which we might be looking at, including process improvements and efficiency. And that's all established, again, by IA standards and codified within our audit charter, which I'll be talking about a little bit more later on. The third bullet, I think is an important thing for the committee to understand, is that we really see internal audit, and the Institute of Internal Audit sees internal audit as the third line of defense. So thinking about the first line of defense as the individual units and people out doing the work who are responsible for ensuring that they are controlling their risks, that they're meeting all of their policy requirements, et cetera. The second line is the compliance functions and policy owners throughout the institution. So both the Office of Institutional Compliance, led by Boyd Coomer, but also all those various policy owners that are looking to and monitoring to make sure that the controls that they've established are really being followed throughout the institution. Then internal audit is that third line, where we have purview over all of the first and second line risk mitigation and management functions. So sometimes it can be confused that people will say that internal audit is the monitoring function for the institution. We aren't. We monitor the monitoring function. So developing the annual audit plan. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide because I go into this in great detail in our June presentation. But the key things I wanted to note is, again, it's broad consultation. Meet with all the board members. We meet with a number of different units. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if I remember correctly, I think we met with 120 different people throughout the institution this year to develop our fiscal year 24 plan across 57 different units. We do that broad risk assessment to think about where would be the best use of our limited resources. We look to align with the institutional risk profile, which was just presented to you. So expect that come June, we'll be looking to tie out our audit plan to that institutional risk profile that Associate Vice President Bonison just presented, and to the strategic plan of the institution, which is currently MPAC 2025. From all that, we identify what our audits are going to be, and then we review that with you in June. So a few types of audit engagements that are a little unique and newer types is how I'm referring to them here that I want to highlight for the committee. First is our senior leader transition audits. This is something we started doing just a couple of years ago, where whenever we have a senior leader that's either leaving the university or returning to the faculty, we look to come in and do very targeted financial and administrative review of their work in those final 6 months to a year, depending on the type of items that we're reviewing. And sometimes we'll look a few years prior if it's a budget question, just to make sure that all the administrative work and the financials appear to be in order, that there's no strange contracts that were signed or agreements that were established on their way out. Our SNAP reviews are very targeted reviews that we perform, often leveraging data analytics, where we are thinking about a very particular risk that we want to try to get an assessment to the process or policy owner on whether we're managing that risk. These can sometimes come out of audits where we see that we're seeing a consistent problem across a few audits, and we want to say, okay, do we have a broader issue here that we should bring to the attention of the policy owner? Or sometimes it can even come from external assessments, discussions with our peers, where something that they've had issues with at their university, for example, that we want to make sure that we're handling here before we, in a more proactive way, instead of waiting until we are able to come through and do more of a full audit. The collaborative assessment, the third one, is maybe the most innovative of our various audit types here, and it's something we've only done a couple of times so far. But this is a situation where we're taking a really broad look at risk, or we're looking at a process that has a very broad risk area with multiple units involved, very complex processes, where there's agreement ahead of time with management that there are some problems or issues or concerns in this area. So we feel like it doesn't make sense for us to spend our normal time we would doing our walkthroughs and our testing, et cetera, that we would in a standard audit if we already agree that there's risk. Instead, we try to do more of a joint risk assessment and put more focus on the mitigation plan, and then for us to come back later and do an audit to confirm that that mitigation plan that has been implemented to reduce those risks are functioning as intended. I mentioned in the work plan discussion that the identity and access management presentation is happening in May. That is designed to set us up so that that the administration can discuss the current level of risk so that we can come back in, hopefully next fiscal year, and be able to provide assurance that, yes, those mitigation steps that they've taken to address those risks are operating as intended, as they've stated. So how do we conduct audit? This is something we were just talking about in our last presentation, but when we think about risk, we think about it in terms of likelihood and impact. An XY, you can picture it on an XY graph. Upper right corner, high likelihood, high impact, that's going to be high risk. Lower left corner, low impact, low likelihood, that's going to be low risk. And then you're going to have some areas in between where maybe it's relatively low likelihood, but the impact is existential. That might still end up being a high risk. Or something that is medium, and medium might be in between. Then when we think about residual risk versus inherent, and this goes back to the previous conversation that we have, you start off with an inherent risk that there's nothing anyone can do about it. It's just the nature of the process or the function that we're looking at, that it may be a very high level of risk. But then we look at the controls that have been implemented to manage that risk, and whatever is left over is what we consider to be the residual risk. When the residual risk is higher than what we would expect, that is where our findings are coming from, our issues within our report. We're saying that the inherent risk is very high. There's maybe some controls in place, but it's not sufficient in order to bring that high risk down, and that's where we're coming with our issue. With the issue, we'll provide a recommendation then that really is the controls we think that should be implemented in order to bring that residual risk down to an acceptable level. When we conduct our audits, we do them in 3 phases: planning, fieldwork, and reporting. The reporting, there's a management action plan that's included in that, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But I want to spend a minute on the bar charts, because this is one of the key visuals that you receive on the audit committee and that we talk through in our document materials. So this bar chart is a color depiction of our assessment of the residual risk of whatever unit or process that we just reviewed. The green is where we believe that there's an adequate mitigation of the inherent risks. The yellow ties to where we think that there's a significant control issue, so our medium level of issues. In essential, our high level of issues are tied to where we think that there is a high level of residual risk that still exists within the area or within that audit. This ties the red and yellow that you see in these bar charts tie directly to the issues that we have within our audit reports. But I will tell you that this is our professional assessment of the overall picture. It isn't a mathematical equation that if you have 3 significant, you get this much yellow bar. If you have 2 red, or 2 essentials, you get this much red. This is our visual depiction of where we think that the residual risk level is for the area that we reviewed. When you're comparing these bar charts to each other, I think a good way of doing it is starting with the first 4 bars, because those are consistent across every audit that we perform where we include one of these control charts. That's coming out of the COSO framework, which by board policy is the internal control framework that the institution uses. It's control environment monitoring, information communication, and risk assessment. The other bars that are included on this bar chart are individual control activities, which will be unique for every audit that we do. So that will tie to the scope section of the audit report. If you're trying to tie it out, you can normally see, sometimes it might not be an exact one-for-one, but they will roll into the various scope components that we looked at. So those will change based upon the process or unit that we're looking at. Okay, management action plan and follow-up. So the one part of the final audit report that is not written by internal audit and is not our professional opinion, but it's management, is the management action plan. They fully write that on their own. They provide it to us. We may have discussion to make sure we're on the same page, but management ultimately owns that document. So at the end of every audit report that we provide to you. In that action plan, they will provide a response to each of the issues and recommendations that we have within the audit report, along with how they intend to address that risk in a timeline. So our recommendations are just that, they're recommendations. Management can resolve the risk in any way that they see fit as long as we're addressing the underlying risk. They don't have to implement the recommendation as we see it. We then perform follow-up every 4 months until all of the high level or essential level issues have been remediated. And so again, those are presented to the Audit and Compliance Committee in October, February, and June. Okay, so that's how we conduct audit work throughout the institution. That gives you a little bit of background on how our department functions. So I want to get a little bit into the weeds on some unique things about the internal audit department. And I think it's important, especially this year, given the items that are on our agenda. So first, the internal audit charter. And this actually is our next agenda item. So kind of blending these two things together here a little bit. This is a really critical document for us that really establishes how our audit department functions, our independence, again, purpose, authority, responsibilities, and reporting. So this is the document that we look to if we had a unit that was questioning whether we can have access to X or Y. It really ties back to the audit charter, where we can say, no, the Board of Regents has authorized us to have access to this information. If there's pushback on particular issues or our assessments of risk, again, it's the audit charter that we will point back to that provides us for our independence and our requirements related to reporting. So this is a foundational document for us. It does tie to the Board of Regents policy, the reservation and delegation of authority, which was updated in October 2021. So some of the amendments that I'm proposing to the audit charter that we'll be discussing in the next agenda item are really to reflect those changes to make sure that we're staying in alignment with those policy changes. The internal audit charter is required to be periodically reviewed with the Audit and Compliance Committee by Institute of Internal Audit Standards. There is some discussion within the IAA of switching that to make that an annual requirement. As of right now, it is just periodic, but if it switches to an annual, we will comply and at least have a discussion about it every year. So the quality assessment reviews. So when you are asked who audits the auditor, this is the answer to that question. So we are audited. Once every 5 years, we have a quality assessment review that is performed, where we bring in external audit professionals to review our work and provide an opinion to the Audit and Compliance Committee on the functioning of our department and whether we're complying with all Institute of Internal Audit standards. How we've handled these QARs in the past and how I'll propose handling it at least this next time going forward is that we begin the QAR process by first doing an internal self-assessment against the IAA standards. We then provide that self-assessment to a group of external professionals who review our assessment, pull work papers, pull documents, meet with key leaders, board members, et cetera, to gather opinions to confirm that what we found in our self-assessment is accurate in order to render opinion. It is required to be done every 5 years. The last time we had this done, it was issued in January 2020. So this will be something that we'll be needing to do here over the next fiscal year. So not FY24, but FY25. Our last QAR team included chief auditors from a number of R1 universities, Oregon State, Illinois, the former chief auditor of Northwestern, and the chief auditor of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. They found that OIA generally conforms with IAA standards, which is the highest rating. Auditors are not known for our hyperbole, so generally conforms is what we get. But I'll give them credit. They gave us a little bit more than that. They also found that the university has a very strong internal audit function. So given the timelines with this is going to be, I think, a major activity for this committee over the next couple of years, and something that I'll be working with committee leadership on as soon as next spring to start identifying potential external members who can come in and do this. A lot of them are doing it on a volunteer basis, and so it can be a little tricky to get people to come in and spend the time with us. A few other important things to know about the internal audit function. We are the university's only internal audit function. There is no other audit function here at the institution. We were established in 1929. So, again, we had a 90-year celebration right before the pandemic, actually. We didn't know it was the celebration right before the pandemic, but that's what it turned out to be. The second bullet, our audit reports are generally public documents. We really write them in such a way so that they should be able to be requested and be able to be provided to members of the public. We ask that still goes through the standard data practices, compliant process for requesting university information, but that is the goal of how we write those documents. There are some rare occasions where there might be specific information security concerns, et cetera, that we want to provide additional detail in that report that we really can't and do that in such a way to maintain the public nature of it. In those situations, though, we would communicate that clearly with the Audit and Compliance Committee and how we would distribute that a little bit differently. The other thing, the last bullet to note here is that unit and process owners can accept risk. So if we have a situation, though, where we still say this is still a very high level of risk, but management says, the cost is astronomical, or we want to resolve this risk, but we want to try to do that as part of a broader process, and we would rather do that in 2-3 years, and we're just going to live with this risk for now. There is an ability for management to be able to accept that risk. If that is very high risk still, though, I will request that they provide a written document to the Audit and Compliance Committee and potentially even present on that to be able to explain the rationale for why they're accepting that risk so that the Audit and Compliance Committee can weigh in on whether you all believe that is appropriate. So with that, just provide our website that we do keep up to date. It has staff directories, information about us, audit charter, et cetera. But if you have any other questions, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Chief Auditor Galswick. This presentation was very helpful, not only for the committee, but I think it's important for the university community as well to have an understanding of this significant work, kind of the bread and butter of our committee. And so I will ask if there's any questions or comments from committee members. I will, let's see, Regent Kenyanya.
Chief Auditor, early in the presentation, you talked about, how you reports flow to you, and I think someone else on your team as well. But, there's many avenues that issues are flagged and reported in the university. Is there a mechanism for you all to coordinate with, the different places where those things may go and make sure that you're all on the same page and things are being addressed?
Chief Auditor Galswick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Farnsworth, Regent Kenyanya. For anything that comes through the U report line, that clearly is going to have a clear coordination, a clear response area. I would say any reports that are received directly to institutional compliance or to internal audit, we coordinate very closely as well. The coordination between some of the other areas, it can be a little bit of a case-by-case basis. I do receive information on all information security incidents, potential data disclosures, data breaches. Whether or not my office is involved may vary depending on the case. There is some work that Boyd Coomer, our Chief Compliance Officer, has really been focused on, of trying to create or have more of a system where all the various groups that perform investigation type work or assessment type work really have a single area to report and roll that up to. As of right now, it's a pretty manual process. His office does go through that manual process. So as part of the December institutional compliance report that he provides to the committee, he'll talk about the overall number of incidents that were reported by all the various to all the various departments, and to kind of pull that information together. But it isn't an area where we currently are in a position where it's real easy or something that we can be able to pull in information from, let's say, incident that happened in EOAA that was reported to them directly, and something that was reported to OHR directly, and something that was reported to institutional compliance. It's pretty manual to do that as of now. But that's an area that his team's working and is with the other compliance partners in order to be able to try to improve.
Thanks.
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. I'll just add that I'm glad that you asked that question, because not only, is that important for folks to understand, but also from the board perspective, we, as board members get approached about various issues, various concerns or reports on things. And this is actually a conversation that the chief auditor, Vice Chair Gully, and I had recently is, when those issues may work themselves up to individual board members, making sure that we, go through audit and compliance, go through the chief auditor. I think most of the time it's going to be just making sure people are aware of the U report structure. And so I'm glad you asked that question. Regent Talurabe.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth and Chief Auditor Goswick. I just had, well, first, thank you for the presentation. It's, I think this is my second sort of overview of this, but it's always really helpful. And I think it's a good reminder about kind of the independence of the audit, internal auditor's office and the connection directly to the Board of Regents. And that overview was really helpful. I had a question about, I know that at times we've had external requests for independent audits. How does that get handled, and does it come to you, and then what considerations do we, or does your office look at to decide if something is worthy of actually pursuing? Yeah.
Chief Auditor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Farnsworth, Regent Talurabe. So, yes, there will be requests for audits or investigations that may come from the general public or could come from community members, et cetera. The answer of how we manage that probably depends a little bit on the type of request. If it is more of a general audit request, again, we have to weigh that against our audit plan and our overall view of where we are currently planning on spending our limited resources in order to be able to manage, or in order to be able to provide assurance to the committee. If something rose to a level where it started to move into an investigation area, there are times in which I might say, okay, this makes more sense for EOAA, for example, to take a look at it by the nature of the comment that is being brought to us, or it could be HR or whomever. So sometimes it's a matter of routing it to the right party. But there are times in which we will receive information or concerns from the general public or from individual community members where we will personally take that and do work in that area. We save a portion of our time specifically for investigations as part of our annual audit planning so that we have that ability to do it. Again, if it moves into the audit area, I'm not saying we wouldn't do something immediately if there really was a major concern in consultation with the Audit and Compliance Committee if we needed to make a change to our audit plan to address something that was to come up. But more likely it's going to be something that we then consider in our next audit plan, where if it's, hey, they have a general concern about how X process is being handled or whatever it might be, we're going to think about, okay, how do we cover that as part of our next audit plan? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any follow-up, Regent Talurabe?
No.
Great. Well, we are right on time then to move to our final agenda item. Thank you, Chief Auditor Goswick, for this presentation on our internal audit process. We'll then move on to our final item of business, which the Chief Auditor mentioned a little bit in his last presentation, which is the proposed amendments to the Office of Internal Audit Charter. And so, Chief Auditor, if you want to walk us through those amendments in particular, this is for review today and action by the committee at our next meeting.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Farnsworth. So, as Chair Farnsworth just mentioned, I talked about this a little bit in my last bullet. But again, the audit charter is our foundational document that we rely on to conduct all of our work. Again, just to remind you, it covers our purpose, authority, responsibilities, reporting, and independence. It's also required by the Institute of Internal Audit Standards for us to have this in place. Given the changes that were made in October of 2021 to the board policy, reservations, and delegations of authority, I went through and made some changes to the audit charter to reflect those, and I also made a few other changes that were really just kind of clarifications and wording. So a couple of spots where I would highlight is under the independence section. of the charter, which I believe is page 41 of your docket materials, you'll see the changes that we made to reflect the policy updates that the board made there. Again, noting our reporting line goes to the Audit and Compliance Committee still from a functional perspective, but to the board leadership from an administration perspective. But again, the president is still allowed to request additional audit services from us, advisory work, et cetera. The other note that was specifically added due to those policy changes under responsibility, there in the policy now, there is a requirement for notifying the board of significant matters. I will tell you, this is something we always would have done, regardless of whether that was codified in policy, but given that it is now codified in policy, I thought it made sense to also codify it within our charter, so I added that there. Finally, on the last page, I added the Board of Regents chair as one of the signature lines, given the direct reporting line I now have to the chair of the board. Other than that, it's cleanup of just some wording, et cetera. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this review item? All right, with that, yeah, just a reminder, again, in the interim between this review and action cycle, if any committee members have any questions, please feel free to bring those forward in the meantime as we prepare to take action on this item next month. And with that, before we adjourn, I forgot to mention at the beginning that I wanted to thank Provost Croson for her participation on this committee as our senior leader liaison. I think we maintain a spot for the president here at the table, but I think the president may join from time to time, but Provost Croson is our main senior leader liaison to the committee. And then, of course, thanks to our OBR staff as well, which was Jason, and now Marlo is taking over as our...
What an upgrade.
Lead. Yeah, right. I wasn't going to say that, but no. Marlo is taking over as our staff liaison as well, and really appreciate all the work that they do from the OBR perspective as well to prepare us for this. So just a reminder for committee members and those, our big audience following along at home, that we are going to reconvene here in the boardroom at 9:30 for the Mission Fulfillment Committee. And with no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.